Right, and I can even say like it's on YouTube. You can watch it right now. Yeah. Do you want me to do that? So in 1988, Marvel was in the midst of trying to develop, not just in 1998, but they were trying to develop their television properties and sell a lot of their properties to TV networks for development. In 1988 specifically, they released what would be known as Pryde of the X-Men. This was a pilot episode for what was supposed to be an ongoing X-Men cartoon. We did get an X-Men cartoon in 1992 that everyone kind of remembers very fondly, but I would argue that this Pryde of the X-Men series had the groundwork for a much more better cartoon than what we ended up getting in 1992. It's essentially a what could have been. The main difference, the 88 show versus the 92 show, is the team makeup of the X-Men. The 90s cartoon had a pretty good team. Cyclops, Jean, Beast, Wolverine, Gambit, Rogue, Storm. They kind of covered their bases with like really cool characters. But the 88 team had, I think, probably better choices. We had Storm, Dazzler, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Cyclops, and then Kitty Pryde was also introduced into the team. And that grouping of characters was always much more interesting to me than what we got in the 90s. Kind of an idea of lose the crowd, share the wealth. There were less characters in the 88 show versus the 92 show, which I thought would have been a better dynamic for team building. The other main thing, and this is probably obvious to everyone who watches it, is the animation was just not there in 92. I think a lot of people fondly remember that series and think it was animated very well, but it just does not hold a candle to the 88 animation. The animation done in 88 was handled by, I think, the same studio that did all the Transformers cartoons and movies, so it was just way more detailed, way more well put together. The lighting, the shadows, the character design. The characters were in what I would say is a far superior costumes than the costumes they used in the 90s. When they went to do the show in the 80s, those were the costumes of the late 70s, early 80s period. When that show didn't take off and they went to actually put the X-Men cartoon that we all know and love together, Jim Lee had come along, had kind of redefined what the X-Men looked like, and they were very keen on using those designs so that the show looked exactly like the comics being released at the same time. The other big difference we saw was in the 88 Pryde of the X-Men, they were setting up what was going to be kind of the formula of the show. Very kind of like G.I. Joe type formula where you had the X-Men versus the Brotherhood of Mutants. And that was going to be a weekly occurrence. The Brotherhood would have a scheme, the X-Men would go in to fight it. You didn't get too much of the Brotherhood in the 92 X-Men cartoon. They did a lot of great villains in that cartoon, but we didn't have the bad guy group consistently from week to week to week that we would have had with the 88 show. The 92 show also focused more on humanity as the enemy versus evil mutants as the enemy. One of the other kind of charming things that the 88 show had that the 92 show didn't have was narrated by Stan Lee. He does the opening and kind of just like explains the show and what it's going to be and how it's going to work. And that was something that goes back all the way to when Marvel first got into the animation game way back in the 60s and 70s. It's hard to say what could have been. I do think, and I really did enjoy the Pryde of the X-Men when I was a kid. I've rewatched it a couple times since. I still think it holds up. There's an entire book about this. If you're looking to read more about how the 92 show came about, that book's called Previously on X-Men, the development of the animated series. It's a phenomenal book written by the people who worked on the actual series, kind of delving into the process about how they pitched the X-Men cartoon initially in the mid-80s that became Pryde of the X-Men, how that show fell through, never got developed into the full series that they pitched, and then continues on through the development and the conclusion of the X-Men animated series from 1992. I do like the 92 series. I think it has a lot of problems. The main problem I have with the 92 X-Men series is it came out competing against Batman the Animated Series, and it just can't hold a candle to that. Batman the Animated Series has had a lot going for it, primarily a visionary in Bruce Timm. He really did set a tone for that series that I don't think anyone on the X-Men side of that equation had a vision quite like Bruce Timm did. The animation was done a lot sleeker. It was a much more interesting style, a much more consistent style than we got in X-Men. I think there were some problems with the studio working on X-Men. They had jumped animation studios once or twice. And then the other thing is the music. Batman the Animated Series had the Warner Brothers Orchestra doing all the music for the series, and the X-Men theme song's phenomenal. I think they had a lot of cool music in the animated series that I think is very iconic. It just does not hold a candle to those Batman the Animated Series episodes, and it premiered at the same time, almost in like a couple weeks of each other, if I'm not mistaken. It's impossible, obviously, to say where Pryde of the X-Men could have gone. We really only have that one episode. I haven't seen anything else that talks about what the series was trying to do or what was going to do. It seemed like it was going to be kind of in this vein of G.I. Joe, where it's good mutants versus bad mutants every week. I'm certain we would have gotten other characters introduced, other mutants, Sentinels, Mojo. They really could have introduced as anything and everything the 90s cartoon eventually did do. What I liked about what Pryde of the X-Men was doing with their villains was right off the bat, they gave us an awesome cast of villains. Magneto, Juggernaut was on the team, White Queen, we got Toad, Pyro, Blob. They just did a great job of assembling a group of bad guys that were distinct, had interesting powers, and were characters we didn't really get to see shine too much in the 90s series. If you do want to check out Pryde of the X-Men, it's super easy to find. You can just search for it on YouTube. The video is called Pryde of the X-Men. If you can, actually watch the recording of the actual cassette. It'll play the commercials beforehand, which is kind of nice. I used to rent the tape from Blockbuster when that was still a thing you could go do. I must have rented it 100 times when I was a kid. It was one of my favorite cartoons I've ever seen. So if you like this content and want to see more like it, feel free to subscribe below. If you want to follow me over on social media, you can find me on Instagram at @TheBraveButterPecan. If you're looking for more content like this, I co-host a weekly podcast called Caffeinated Comics. You can find anywhere you find your podcasts. If you're interested in any of the titles we've mentioned during this episode, I'd encourage you to support your local comic book store. If you don't know where your local comic book store is, you can go to comicshoplocator.com, type in your zip code, and they'll show you the nearest store.